So hello, welcome to the video and welcome to 2023. I've been fortunate to have had the opportunity to go on 17 cruises with a fair few more booked. But I clearly remember the anxiety I felt when I booked my first cruise 14 years ago. My parents had cruised a lot and really liked it, but I wasn't so sure whether a cruise would work for me. I was looking to travel on my own. I was obviously a generation younger than my parents, and my holidays up until that point had focused more on overlanding through India than they had on spending 6 hours a day in an all-you-can-eat buffet. But I needn't have worried. I loved the cruise that I picked, and I've loved each of the 16 I've taken since. And I think you'll love cruising too. Now I make videos about my cruise experience, I'm frequently asked questions about things that aren't obvious to people who are contemplating their first cruise. So today I'll talk about the 6 things that you need to know about if you're looking to book your first cruise. I'll also talk about the anxieties I experienced when I booked my first cruise and put them into context now I've had some cruising experience. There'll be some surprises in here, but also perhaps some handy tips, even for those who have cruised before. So if that sounds good, stick around. Hi, I'm Matt, and I love cruising. I love the ships, the places you visit, the entertainment, and every now and again I'll also enjoy a drink. So subscribe, and you might pick up some hacks, hints and tips to make your next cruise better. So first up, let's assume you're interested in taking a cruise but have no real idea which cruise line or cruise ship you should pick. You could spend weeks reading websites, watching videos or asking friends. And here's my first quite surprising point, and that is that I'm not sure it matters that much which cruise line you pick for your first cruise. Let me explain. Every cruise involves getting on a ship, cruising to various places, eating and drinking, being entertained, sleeping in a cabin, and sharing the experience with a number of complete strangers. Every cruise line is the same in every one of these regards. Even river cruises follow this pattern. If, when you've taken your first cruise, you realise that you didn't like any one of these elements, it won't matter which cruise line you were on, cruising isn't going to be for you. And if you loved the cruise but perhaps didn't love one or other of these elements, then you can knowledgeably look at websites, watch videos and speak to your friends with a frame of reference with which you can then finesse your choice of next cruise. Now, of course, there are great differences between cruise lines and cruise ships in each of these categories, so you will certainly benefit from giving it some thought. Sailing on a ship with 6,000 passengers is a very different experience to sailing on one with 600, and sailing in an inside cabin is a very different experience to sailing with a balcony. But my point is that all cruise experiences are essentially the same, and the pricing variances you'll see between the various cruise lines is a very good proxy for how the experiences will differ. The higher the price, the better the food is likely to be, the better the accommodation is likely to be, and the lower the passenger load is likely to be to allow the cruise line to deliver a better service experience. But if you follow this point's logic through to its conclusion, this is possibly an argument for not spending very much on that first cruise. If you don't enjoy it, you won't have wasted too much money. I chose Carnival for my first cruise as I had a perception that it would be a younger crowd, which I thought would be a better fit for me. And from that first experience, I learned that the energy the cruise line puts into entertaining the crowd is more important than the age of that crowd. So when you've booked your first cruise, you may think that your work is now done. But the cruise line you've booked with will think differently, and they will start to tempt you with all sorts of extras and add-ons. You don't have to do anything before you board, and I certainly didn't before I got on my first cruise, but you probably should. And I'm going to talk about 2 things in this video, the first of which is excursions. You'll stop at 4, 5, perhaps even 6 ports on a 7-night cruise, and it's very unlikely you'll be able to get off the ship and be somewhere interesting in every one of those ports. It's more likely in the Caribbean, but even then you may find yourself docking somewhere where there isn't anything of great interest within walking distance of the ship. And even if you do stop in the heart of a town, you may still want to take an excursion to get a little further afield in your destination than your feet will be able to carry you. So purchasing an excursion could well make sense, and you'll then have two options: buying an excursion from the ship or purchasing one independently. The big difference between those two options is that an excursion bought through the ship guarantees to get you back to the ship. If there's some catastrophe on your tour, the ship will wait for you. Many people will give that as the reason why they only ever take ship excursions, and it is the reason why ship excursions are sold at a hefty premium. But it's a very, very exaggerated risk. Independent operators can be found through websites like Viata or toursbylocals.com, and they'll offer very similar excursions to those offered by the ship. But those sites will also offer ratings and guest reviews of the experience, which will help you make an informed decision. But they'll invariably be cheaper than the ship option, and as independent operators they'll be subject to greater competition than the ship's monopoly provider. So in my experience, their excursions could be quite a bit better than the ship's. But missing the ship would be a catastrophe. It is your responsibility to get to the next port to catch up with the ship, which can be expensive, time-consuming, and may not even be possible if you didn't take your passport ashore with you for the day. But the independent operators know this, and because their reviews are public, they would be instantly out of business if they ever failed to get passengers back to the ship. So missing the ship is not as big a concern as the ship would have you believe, and remember, they are profiting from amplifying this risk. And if you think about it, if there is a massive smash on the road back to the port which delays you, the people in the bus behind you are probably on a ship's excursion, so the ship will be waiting for them, which means you'll get back just as quickly as they will. So don't discount an independent excursion operator, as you may get a better experience at a lower price. And also don't discount just getting off and doing your own thing. On my first cruise, which was in the Caribbean, I didn't book a single excursion, and looking back on that experience, that was just fine. I'm still a very independently minded traveller, and I would guesstimate that I've only taken excursions in 20 or 25% of the 100+ ports I visited. And I said you don't have to do anything before you board, and you don't. Although if you want to take an independent excursion, connectivity when you're on board the ship is likely to be very poor or very expensive, so it probably is something you want to get arranged before you board. If you're interested in a very specific ship excursion, it's probably best to book that in advance too, to avoid disappointment if it sells out. If you don't have a specific excursion in mind, I have seen discounts offered on board as they try and fill the last few slots, and I've also seen tours be cancelled that have been booked before boarding. That doesn't happen often, but if they don't fill out to a certain level, they will cancel it. Nothing, unfortunately, can be guaranteed. The next point is the second temptation that will be dangled in front of you, which is a drinks package. Some fares include drinks these days. You might get it included as part of a promotion, and the premium lines will generally be all-inclusive with drinks included. You may not drink, which makes this a little bit simpler for you, but for the rest of us, it's a very difficult decision. When I first cruised, you signed a little chit for every drink you consumed, and on the last night of your cruise, an enormous wad of papers were stuffed under your cabin door containing your bill. You'd then go through that bill and cross-reference every item on it to a chit that you'd signed. Or if you're not a chartered accountant, you'd assume it was right and just pay it anyway. Drinks packages these days are incredibly common, and they do simplify the cruise process as well as greatly speeding up service when you're on board. It's rare to see people signing chits these days. So simplicity is one of the reasons for taking a drinks package, as is certainty over how much you're going to pay. You pay one amount up front and that's it. It's a big amount, it may even be a disconcertingly big amount, but there'll be no jeopardy about how much you're spending when you're actually on your cruise, which for me is quite a big plus. Cruise lines don't make it easy to see how much drinks actually cost on board their ships, as a very logical step is to see how many drinks you would need to consume each day to make the drinks package worthwhile. If you do want to do this, just Google the ship's name and you'll find plenty of blogs with ships menus published. Some of the menus may be out of date and prices do vary from ship to ship, but it'll give you a pretty good idea. If you do that exercise, you'll find that you probably need to drink between 5 and 7 drinks a day to make the drinks package worthwhile. Probably a little more if you drink beer, probably a little less if you drink cocktails. Which may feel like a lot. It's probably more than you drink at home. But you'll be on holiday and the opportunities for drinking will be abundant. You may think you'll drink less as you're off the ship most days in ports, but you'll be back on in the evening, which is when most of the opportunities will arise. Plus there may well be sea days on your cruise, and day drinking is an excellent way of passing the time. 2 bits of fine print which may help you with your decision making. Firstly, you'll need to buy the drinks package for every day of the cruise, and secondly, you'll have to buy the drinks package for every adult occupant of your cabin. That's done to minimise opportunities for people to game the system, and it may make the decision a little bit easier for you. You may also be offered a slight discount for buying the drinks package before boarding, although it will be available for the first day, perhaps 2 days, of your cruise. Having said that, I've not seen a drinks package offered at a discount to the price you would have paid before boarding, although of course that is possible. This is a big decision, as paying $60 or $70 a day for drinks adds a very large cost to your cruise experience, particularly for longer cruises. But I like a drink, and I like not having to worry about the costs while I'm away on my holiday. So I always get the drinks package, and I think for most people, even those that consider themselves to be moderate drinkers, it will actually make sense. I said this is an easier decision for non-drinkers, but there is still a decision to be made if that's you. Soft drinks will not be included in your cruise fare, so you'll have to go through a fairly similar process of evaluating how many soft drinks you might consume in a day to see whether buying the soft drinks package makes sense. It's a lower cost, but it's not a zero cost. And finally, you can take a limited amount of alcohol on board with you, but the cruise lines will check your bags when you first board and will check them again every time you get back on the ship in a port. You may think this doesn't make a lot of sense given the preponderance of drinks packages these days, but the ships do have a legal obligation to serve drinks responsibly, and they justify this ban on DIY alcohol as a way for them to be able to control people's inebriation. You didn't hear it from me, but there is a growing industry of companies developing products to assist people in smuggling alcohol onto cruise ships. Even if you're not interested, it is quite a fun thing to Google, as the innovation levels in these products can be pretty high. So I have 2 points to make about things you might want to pack. This again is something I am asked quite frequently, and the first of those concerns what to pack for formal nights. Most cruise ships have formal nights, Norwegian being the exception. Celebrity calls them chic nights, but you will find a couple of opportunities per cruise to dress up for dinner, which lots of people love. The opportunities to do that in normal life are increasingly limited. And people do make an effort. I've seen all sorts of ball gowns aboard. I've seen men in full dress uniforms. And on every cruise I've ever been on, I've seen at least one bloke who has lugged a kilt and all the accessories halfway round the world specifically to wear on formal night. And those things are not light. But there's no obligation to dress up. The buffet will not enforce a formal dress code, so you'll still be able to eat even on those nights. And for most cruise lines, the main dining room will not turn you away either. They'll probably have a fairly low-level dress code for every night of the cruise anyway, and as long as you conform with that, they'll let you in. So it's really not as big a deal as a lot of people make of it. Yes, you can go full Lady Gaga if you want, and that can certainly be fun, but if you don't, you really won't be missing out on much. I usually take a jacket and pair it with some dark jeans and some sensible shoes, and that's usually good enough, and it minimises the amount of clobber I need to lug around specifically for that formal evening. The next point is seasickness tablets, and even the smallest cruise ship will still be larger than the largest ferry or pleasure craft you will have been on. Plus, they have enormous bits of kit below the waterline that are designed to keep the ship stable. I'm not prone to motion sickness, so I may not be the best person to give advice here, but I've never felt the slightest element of seasickness on a cruise. I've certainly felt the motion of the ship, but it's only ever been a slow roll and nothing that has unsettled me. In fact, it's actually quite pleasant to be reminded that you're actually at sea. So if you know you're not prone to motion sickness, I really wouldn't worry about it. If you are prone to motion sickness and this is your first cruise, there are some regions you might want to consider first. Cruises in the Mediterranean and Baltic seas tend to experience the least amount of motion because those bodies of water are the calmest as a result of their geography. The Caribbean can be pretty calm too, although I'd avoid the hurricane season. And open oceans can be rough at any time of the year, so probably best to avoid the Pacific or the Atlantic as your first cruise if you are prone to motion sickness. And remember, the cruise lines don't want you to be sick as it gets in the way of your enjoyment. They will work hard to avoid bad weather, even to the extent of skipping a port if it means they can stay in waters that are calm. And by all means take acupressure bands and seasickness tablets just in case. But for me, seasickness is just not something I even think about. And my final point concerns boarding. I used to hate boarding. It used to inevitably involve waiting in line for a long time, and as my first cruise departed from San Juan in Puerto Rico, that wait took place in a baking hot and humid shed. A week is 168 hours long, and I used to say to people that you should expect the first hour when you get on board to be terrible, and you should probably expect the last hour when you get off to be pretty terrible too. So focus on the 166 hours in the middle, which will be brilliant. But the you-know-what has greatly improved things. Cruise lines had to innovate ways of avoiding long lines so they didn't have their passengers crammed together in close confinement. So a lot of the document processing is now done online before you reach the terminal, which greatly streamlines the boarding process. There's also now usually a process where you pick a slot to arrive at the terminal, which again is designed to space out passenger arrivals and limit crowding. But this is widely ignored, and again, you didn't hear it from me, but if you ignore whatever slot you've been given, there almost certainly will be no consequences. But it does mean that the boarding process is now much better than it used to be, and on a couple of occasions recently I've got from my car to the ship in under 15 minutes, which is really very good. Generally, you'll tag your larger luggage with your cabin number, drop it off outside the terminal, and it will be delivered to your cabin some hours later. Don't leave anything in the bag that you're going to need, like your documents or any medications. And you're more than welcome to lug your bags aboard yourself if you want, although if you've got your kilt with you, you probably want to let the cruise staff do it for you. Which brings me to the substantive part of this point, which is that boarding day is the first day of your holiday. You're paying for the food, the entertainment and the cruise ship experience for that day, and for the drinks as well if you've bought a drinks package. So get on early. If I'm boarding overseas, I will always try and travel the day before. That firstly de-risks the travel experience as you're not going to be too worried about delays, but it also means I can be one of the first to the port in the morning and therefore be one of the first aboard. And another top tip is to put some swimming trunks in your hand luggage so you can get access to them before your bags are delivered to your cabin. Very, very few people think to do this, and it means you'll often have the pool pretty much to yourself on that first day after boarding. This video could have been twice or even 3 times as long, and there may actually need to be a sequel, but I hope there's at least been something in here that has been helpful to you. I still love adventurous independent travel, and I talk a lot about that on my sister channel to this, which is called Matt's Planet. But I don't see cruising as being inconsistent with that love. Indeed, I think cruising provides you with a great opportunity to have adventures, as a new destination is delivered to you each day and you only have to unpack once. So thanks for watching. Give this video a like if you've got something from it. Please consider subscribing if you're new, and leave me a comment. Have you found something of value in here? Which cruise lines are you considering for your first cruise? And if you'd like to support what I'm doing more directly, I have a Patreon account, the link to which is in the description below. So thanks again for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one. Goodbye.